Herbalist path. I am so excited today because we get to have Shana Lipner Grover on the podcast. And I say it with such excitement and enthusiasm because I got to meet Shana this summer at Oshala Herb Farms Herb Camp. So Oshala is one of my favorite farms out there. And I didn't get to meet Shana until the end. And it was like, I just wanted to hang out with her forever and nerd out on herbs and the outdoors and our love for nature and our love for teaching and like all the good things. But I had to like leave and it was a super bummer. So I'm really excited to have Shana here. She's an absolutely brilliant teacher and educator. She makes wonderful products. She runs Sage Country Herbs and does a botanical field apprenticeship and has a lot of great online classes and offerings. She mixes the science of herbs along with the art of herbs. She teaches a lot on botany. She's just this wealth of knowledge and information, and she's really cool too. So Shana, I'm super happy to have you here today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, did I miss anything in that intro? I just kind of rambled it out there.
I think you touched on most of the aspects of my world. Yeah.
Sweet. We have so much more to talk about. So I'm just thrilled to have you. So I'd love to hear a little bit about little baby Shana and how she got immersed into the plant world. Like, where did your beginnings come from? What made you be like, oh, this is really cool, and I'm gonna do this for the rest of my life?
So, baby Shana was ridiculously shy and found nature to be so much more accepting than being around people. So I didn't realize I was into herbs at all, but I was just a full-on tomboy, climbing trees. I'd rather be covered in resin than wearing a dress. I would never wear a dress when I was a kid. Nature was just, that's what I like to do. I would go camping with my family on occasion, just doing a lot of things. We grew up in the Midwest, so just really love nature. And early on, I actually wanted to be an astronaut, and I went to like space camp and Space Academy, and I was all excited until I realized that that pollution is really destroying the planet, and that actually I wanted to focus more on environmentalism, and I didn't even really know what that meant. I just knew that I wanted to be involved in nature in some degree. And so then when I moved to Oregon when I was 20, I took my first herb class. Like, first of all, Oregon is just like, there's just plants everywhere, and right. I mean, it's really like, just raining all the time. Yeah. And that's why I took my first herb class, and just fell in love. And then I was living in a community house, and I remember I had a sinus infection, and a friend of mine gave me something. I honestly don't even know what it was at this point, but it was horribly bitter. But they said, "Here, drink this," and it was very robust. And after some coughing and hacking and maybe even actually throwing up a little because I was not expecting what was happening. After that, like 10 minutes of kind of uncomfortableness, my sinus infection was gone. Like, I was like, whoa. And when you have that type of, like, you're in an acute phase of whatever. And I've seen this in my clinical practice, in my teaching, when you're in an acute phase of something, the right herb for the right person at the right time can be like miracle work. And that's what really like grabs someone, and so I was already a nature lover. And then it was like, wait, this stuff can do this. So then now, like, okay, all the gates are off. It's like, and then once I got into it, it was just like, well, of course I'm going to do this. And I had no idea what it meant for a career. I just knew that I'd never been that excited about something. And every class I took, I wanted to take another. And so luckily in Oregon, there's like an herbal school, like on every corner.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different, and honestly, I love that about the fact that we don't have regulation in herbalism, because it means that I took 4 different schools and studied with 4 different teachers. And of course there was overlap, but there was also check out this cool thing from this perspective. And now this next teacher, check out this same cool thing from this perspective or from this. And it allows you to actually get a much bigger picture than just, this is the right way. And I think I really appealed to that attitude that there is not one right way. It's about actually incorporating herbs into your life and how do you create that connection.
Yeah, I love that perspective. I think it's so much of the beauty of herbalism and the journey of learning herbalism. And I also went to several different schools and classes and studies and have had some amazingly brilliant herbal teachers and people passing on their wisdom to me, which I'm so incredibly grateful for. And it couldn't be further from the truth, like the beauty and the importance of learning from different people, because it is both science and art, and it's such a big, never-ending study. Like, sure, maybe I've been looking into this stuff and studying it since the early 2000s, but I'm far from an expert. And, I still want to go to the classes and I still want to learn from people. And, there's just so much to learn that you can't possibly take it all in either.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love that.
I love it too. I think when I was a kid, I would get bored really easily in school. I was that kid whose brain was just like, oh, I got it. Next. And I won't ever have that with herbalism.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Never
absolutely.
ending fascination. That's
That's
awesome. So when you were 20-year-old Shana, who were some of your greatest teachers or 20s-year-old Shana, who were some of your greatest teachers that you got to learn from?
So I started with Cherie Capps. She was at the Center for Herbal Studies. And that was like this really sweet little garden-based herbal study program. And then but then after that, I really wanted to go kind of more in the like witchier perspective. And so then I studied with Colette Gardner at the Blue Iris Botanicals. And that was actually her last year teaching herbs solely, because then she opened up a magic school. And so it really shifted. So after her advanced program, I thought, okay, I'm going to be done now. I'm going to start seeing, clients. But then she brought in Howie Brownstein and Stephen Yeager from the Columbine School to do a guest teaching. Well, half of my class or more had already taken the Columbine School, because that's the beauty of herb schools, that, you can take them at different times. And now I've learned, like, herb schools share students. I share students with the other herb schools all the time. So when I went out with Howie and Stephen for the first time, it was just three students and 2 teachers. It was like this one-on-one, and we were deep in the Cascade range, and something shifted in me with that. Like all of a sudden it was like, where do I sign up? Okay, I'm going to a 3rd school. Like it was just this hands down, the way that Howie and Stephen, and back then there was also Ann Hill and Karen Keaton, the way that they taught something about being submerged in where plants grow. A lot of people just assume that herbalists, especially field herbalists, like know every plant or are master gardeners. And I'm not a master gardener. I mean, I learned to garden in Oregon. You just throw seeds out. Like, even if you forget to water, they usually grow, and then you move down here to Southern California, and gardening, woo, is it a different beast. And so, while studying the garden based, it was really lovely, but something about going out in the field and being like submerged completely shifted everything. So Howie Brownstein and Stephen Yeager, definitely big on my mentor list. I remember really appreciating Cascade, Anderson Geller, and this is all like the Pacific Northwest, like kind of rock stars. David Hoffman, first herbal. I looked up, like, the binding is all broken, because I looked up everything in David Hoffman's holistic herbal.
Yeah.
And this woman, Cheryl Tilner.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you can't see that.
I've got it right here. This one.
There you go. That's the one. Yep. Love. Yeah. She was out in Pleasant Hill, and she used to do herb conferences. So yeah, there's definitely been a lot. And then in 2006, I did everything that Columbine's offered twice as a teacher trainer. So I started teaching.
Ooh, nice. I
was terrified of public speaking. I remember crying in high school over having to give a 7-minute lecture. Like now I can do an 8-hour lecture and like not even like blink. But what I realized is that it's talking about things that I'm passionate about.
Huge difference.
Huge difference. Because now, like, of course, like I love teaching. And so Howie was training me to teach. And then he said, look, he was one of the guest teachers at Michael Moore's school for many years and good friends with Michael and Donna. And he said, look, you know, a lot of what Michael teaches, like I teach a lot of that stuff. So you'll already have a lot of the basics, but this is going to be his last year. So 27th and final year, this is your opportunity to study with the master, and it won't come again. And so I was at a transitory period of my life anyway. I packed my bags and I moved to Bisbee, Arizona, which was a very big shock. Oregon to Arizona is a very big shock.
Physically and everything.
Yeah, everything.
Yeah.
But it was really cool because what happened at Michael's is not only did I get a much, like, because I understood the basics of his perspective, I was able to get a much deeper understanding. I also realized that there were some of my students, because it was his final year, they were kind of packing them in. And there were some of his students that weren't really keeping up. So I got the opportunity to start doing beginner classes just to catch everybody up, to be able to understand the terminology he was doing, which then gave me a really good basis for realizing what teaching is and the style of teaching and what we're doing as teachers. And so fell in love with teaching. I fell in love with the thing that was my biggest fear as a child, was public speaking. And it turns out facing that fear, best thing I ever did, literally created who I am.
I love that. I love that story so much, because we need more people teaching these things. And of course, I know and love so many of your great teachers as well. Cascade has had a profound impact on my life, and Howie and Stephen are hilarious and brilliant. And there's never ending learning going on with those guys too. So it's really great. And I love that. I didn't get to study with Michael Moore, but my first herb school was run by somebody who did. So I feel like I touch so many people that did these days. And I'm like, okay, you know, I didn't get to learn from him directly, but I definitely have through his students. So that's really beautiful. And it's just great because this information, it really needs to be passed on. I was just having a conversation with somebody the other day about how much, well, one, plant medicine has been around for thousands upon thousands of years, right? But then in the last 200 years, we've been all washed in the brain and forgotten about it, you know, just a couple of generations and poof, it's gone by microwave TV dinners and fast food. And here's this pill, take it. Don't worry about the side effects. There's only 25. We got a pill for those too, you know, like the information got lost. And thankfully it's on the rise again, thanks to people like you. I think one of the really cool things about what you're doing at Sage Country, I mean, there's a lot of really cool things, but that you get people out there touching the plants, learning botany and the language behind botany, and really getting that immersive experience. And yeah, I think that's a really, really important piece. And I know it makes me chuckle because you brought up like, oh, they think just because you're an herbalist, you're a master gardener and you know every single plant. And I can't count the amount of texts and messages I get. Hey, Mal, what's this plant? Hey, Mal, what's this plant? Here's a really crappy picture. What's this plant? Like,
or worse, the people who, like past students who have like tagged me on social media while they're like saying, this is this plant and I'm going to use it in this ways. And they're telling their people. And I'm like, oh, no. So do I do this public or do I do it private? Like, thanks for tagging me, but you don't have the proper ID and you should not be telling people to use this plant. And they're like, oh, but my app said it was. And I'm like, did you not study with me?
Yeah.
Like you cannot rely on an app by itself. You need to have some of your own knowledge to be able to say, because no app tells you this is what it is.
Right.
It scans it and says, maybe it's these. And then it's up to you to decide whether it's right. So it's like that we need more people who can it's so easy for everyone to take the convenient route. And now that there's plant apps, and don't get me wrong, I have some plant apps and I appreciate having a place to start, but I feel like my training of turning my botanical eyes on makes it so that those apps are actually more prevalent for me because I can identify the differentiations. Yeah. Whereas a lot of people just see, oh, it's a yellow flower, it's a yellow flower, it's a green leaf, it's a green leaf. They look pretty similar. Okay. And like, yeah, no,
the way to go.
No.
Yeah, it's sad to see that. And I think, I guess I haven't had people tag me saying, look at what I just did or whatnot, but I definitely see it all over the interwebs, like the picture of the big basket of plant and like, I just harvested XYZ and what do I do with it now? And it's not XYZ. And you didn't even know what to do with this medicine before you decided to go out and just take.
Or the other flip side of that, which is where I've been putting a lot of focus in down here, is people like either ripping up or using poisons to kill all these weeds when it's like, whoa. I mean, even if you don't want to like eat them, which there's been some studies showing that a lot of the weeds actually are more nutritionally diverse and nutritionally dense than a lot of our, conventionally grown produce. But on top of that, there's a lot of medicine there. So whether you're going to use it as food or medicine, even if you're not going to do any of that, then compost it or ferment it and make plant juice and feed it back. Like that's what we do. We get these weedy nettles that just pop up like all winter long everywhere. The sting, they're invasive. The sting is like it's not that big of a deal. So my favorite thing that we learned to do is to make fermented plant juice, to take the weeds that are trying to compete with the plants that we did plant, like our, carrots and whatever, take those weeds and then ferment them and turn them into plant food. Like take the problem and turn it into a solution instead of paying for poison to kill it and then having to pay for plants and fertilizer to make them grow. Like, how about we go back to how nature did things and we just like compost it and we give it back because that's what nature does. It's a recycler and everything really is raw material. So how about we recognize using that abundance instead of seeing things as wrong or bad or down here, because I live in Southern California and I had to come to terms with this with doing a field school, that if I'm going to be taking people out into the wild, if you will, and teaching them about plant medicine, what is just as important is to teach them, especially because there's 22 million people, about the value of the weeds that grow around them and the local farms that have all kinds of plants, weeds, and other plants that they're not using, like creating these relationships and realizing, to me nowadays, like I understand people being attracted by the exotic plant that looks crazy or is supposed to be amazing at its effectiveness. But what I actually find is way more effective is the thing that's abundant, because you don't have to go tromping out to that far distant place. You can just go in your backyard and find like a weed, or go to a local farm and find amazing medicine that is abundantly around you. And really, I'm not saying we should never order from other farms or, other places, but to recognize that we are surrounded with food and medicine, and we need people to realize that exotic things are not necessarily better than the things that grow around us. And the more we value the things that grow around us, the more access we have.
Yeah. I love that perspective too. It's fact, at least in my mind, I mean, we need to utilize what is abundant around us. You're so incredibly right. And talking about weeds, you have a little online course about eating the weeds. Yeah.
Yeah. It's called Eat Your Weeds, and it started and still continues as a live class I do on farms. Mm-hmm. I do one or two a year that is open to the public down here in Southern California, and we contract with different farms. And we consider it's like a win-win-win, because I bring people to the farm and I teach them how to identify the most common weeds. And then we harvest, and we talk about other places to harvest, what is like a clean place you should be. Like, this is deadly toxic.
You should be freaking out.
Yes.
Like, I don't usually say freak out right now, but
this would be a time, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So on the world of weeds, I if you were to pick out one weed that everybody should know, what is it? I know that's hard, but what is it and why?
Okay, so two popped in my head.
Nope, one. One first, then we'll go on to two.
All right.
I could break rules.
Okay, they are your rules. It's great. So the very first one that popped into my head is cheeseweed.
Yeah.
Either Malva neglecta, Malva parviflora. And the reason, number one, is because most of the Malvaceae is non-toxic. So there isn't actually a lot of lookalikes. Like around here, the main lookalike that I've seen for cheeseweed is like nasturtium, which is also an edible, invasive. And so that's wonderful when lookalike is actually still something that is edible. That's wonderful. The other reason is because since moving to the Southwest, I had never experienced mucosal membrane deficiency issues until I lived in an environment that had very, very little humidity. I'm someone that I always had oily hair and oily skin and never really experienced those types of issues. And then after teaching a lot, realizing that I lose so much vapor and so much moisture from my body just from talking. Mm-hmm. And when you teach, 3 to 6 hour classes regularly, you're losing a lot of vapor. And then when the humidity is so low outside, it's sucking the moisture from your skin. I fell in love with demulcents. Yeah, absolutely fell in love. And because, dry mucosal membranes make you more susceptible to infections and all of these issues around mucosal membrane health actually is a huge part of our immunity and our digestion and our ability to regulate our temperature and all these things that I never realized because I didn't live in an environment where it made it an acute issue. And dryness is such an acute issue down here. We just had a week of Santa Ana's. People get nosebleeds who never have nosebleeds, but everything is so dry that mucosal membranes crack.
What are Santa Ana's? I'm assuming there's some type of wind weather pattern.
Yeah, they're a type of wind. It's a weather pattern that's coming from the deserts, from the Sonoran, and it's really dry. And it literally just dries everything out. And they usually last for a couple of days to a week, and everything just, everything, it's like you feel it before you hear about it, or understand what's going on. Why is my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth when I wake up? The Santa Ana's. Why do my eyes feel like sand when I blink? It's a Santa Ana's. It's that extreme dryness. So cheeseweed, it's totally non-toxic. You can eat every part of it. You can pickle it. I've used the leaves. I've pickled the leaves and used them like dolma wrappers with really big ones. The cheeseweed seed pods are crunchy and also fun to pickle or ferment, and they're just every part of the plant, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, I love that. Where does it grow typically?
Oh gosh, roadsides. It loves to grow on the edges of the garden. It likes that disturbance. So that's where I love going to organic gardens or farms, because the edges where, they run their trucks or, that's where all the weeds are. And if it's an organic farm, you don't generally have to worry about, it being on the side of the road where, maybe there's a couple farm trucks that drive by it, but you don't have, thousands of cars and exhaust driving by it all the time. So disturbed areas, but if you can identify disturbed areas that are not toxic, ranches, everywhere that cows and horses walk is disturbed area, and you can get all kinds of wonderful plants in those areas that maybe the cows don't eat. Now, cheeseweed, they do, so that wouldn't be one of them.
Awesome. I love that. And I love demulcent. So I can especially understand your love for them living down there. I live in a very wet environment, as you know, but tell our listeners what the heck a demulcent is.
Ew, a demulcent is generally a plant that is, or a substance that is rich in mucilage. And mucilage is a water-loving fiber, so it holds water. So when you drink your throat coat tea, your tea that has marshmallow root or slippery elm, or down here people are really into the superfood chia seeds, and which are just a salvia seed, a sage seed. And so when you drink demulcents, they're leaving a trail down your mucosal membrane, every mucosal membrane that they touch. But then the action of demulcent, like the feeling of that kind of sliminess on your throat, will then trigger other dry mucosal membranes like sinuses or lungs. Because when you drink tea, you don't want it going into your lungs. Of course, you would drown. But what you do, like if you have really dry, like, dry congestion or dry hot lungs, when you drink a demulcent tea, it actually triggers other dry mucosal membranes to start secreting that nice, thin, healthy mucus to coat and soothe dry membranes. So demulcents work directly, and they also work by encouraging your body to find that balance. And if there's one thing I've learned from living in a place that is on one end of the spectrum of that balance of like moist to dry, we're closer to the dry. If there's one thing I've definitely realized, it's that we need to be more careful about paying attention to that balance of wet to dry in our own bodies. And that, like, when you're too wet and too congested, that's problematic. And when you're too dry and too, irritated, that's also problematic. And we need to, gently try to get to that balance. And what we find in our mainstream culture is that there's nothing gentle about medicine. It's like, oh, you're dry, here, let's like make you to where you're like sniffling, or, oh, you're sniffling, let's dry you out completely. Like, no, we want to like
find
gently
a balance.
Yeah, and herbs are wonderful for that, because we can use them. And this is another thing that evolved as an herbalist for me, that early on, like, of course, as with most people, I was very attracted to the robust herbs that have a really strong effect that you can really feel. But the more you practice as an herbalist and getting that feel of balance, I find now chamomile is like a best friend. And when I was younger and just getting into herbs, chamomile was so boring. It's like, you can find chamomile
Everybody knows that one.
Right. Like, I want like a fancy one that only wildcrafters know about, that you can't grow in a garden. Like, but now it's like, oh man, like when I had food poisoning, chamomile was amazing. So that, like, getting to know, the abundance and the things that grow around you, but also, developing relationships with things that are more specifically gentle. And that's what demulcents, they're so gentle yet incredibly effective. So.
Yeah. I love the word demulcent, and I love teaching people about demulcents and the slime and how that's the good medicine, people. Don't be afraid of slime all the time.
Yeah.
All right. What's weed number 2?
Well, nettles, of course.
It's always so fun to hear what people come up with, and nettles is definitely a popular one. But why nettles for you?
Why nettles for me is because around here, weedy nettles, like we've got our native nettles that are like 12 feet tall, and their stingers down here, 48 to 72 hours of pins and needles, like,
wow.
or of like they are intense and they stick in you. I had never experienced a nettle stinger actually in my skin. And then I took my little hand lens when I was out botanizing. I was like, why? Like, I had backhanded a nettle. And I was like, why is this still like irritating? And I took my hand lens and I saw there was this little stinger still in there. And so while those nettles are amazing, like, a lot of care needs to be taken, but we are covered in Southern California with weedy nettles, or garden nettles. They're called Urtica urens. They grow like 2 to 3 feet tall. The sting is like, meh. It's like there's an awareness there, but it's gone in like a minute or two. It's a good sting for kids to get to know, as the first sting of like a stinging plant, because it's really not too bad. But also, of course, nettles are ridiculously nutritious. They're some of the most mineral-rich plants on the planet. And if they grow like weeds, and then like what we do is we grab them when they're like 4 to 6 inches tall, because they're just growing like a mat.
Yeah.
Over anywhere that they can. Like every potted plant has little nettles growing out of them. So we just go through and there's so much food there. There's so much, like, I can dry them. I can whir them into pesto. I can throw them in a stir fry. Or like we talked about earlier, I can ferment them and make them into plant food, which is just so cool.
Yeah. So
can't say, although I will say one thing I learned when I lived in Oregon, nettles were just a really nutritious tea. Wonderful, wonderful, great, for allergies and all the wonderful things that nettles is used for. Down here, there are some people who tend to have a drier constitution. Like they tend to be more dry, where nettles will actually dry them out too much.
Yeah.
Because it's such a powerful diuretic. And what a cool thing. I love that concept of fluid system energetics, where if you're using something that's a powerful diuretic, it'll actually pull fluid from areas that have a lot of fluid, like sinuses, and dry them out, but sometimes dry them out too much. I had never experienced that in Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest. Down here, it's actually pretty common that people can't handle nettles.
Yeah.
That was wild. So interesting.
Yeah, I could see that happening for sure. Like I like to think that everybody could have nettles, but I definitely don't think about that with somebody who's very old and dry and brittle. And, you know, that's not who I'm giving nettles to, unless I'm giving it with a nice coating, wet demulcent herb, you know, so.
Or like ground up in a soup, you know, so yeah, totally.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. I want to also talk a little bit about Sage Country's botanical field study, because that sounds like an amazing experience. I have not spent much time down in the Southwest of the United States, so I want to hear about it. Tell me about it.
So cool. So cool. The field apprenticeship is my heart song. I am literally in gratitude every day that I get to have a job where I am just like so bursting with wanting to share, and then being able to see when people come out and they're just like, wow, or it's so cool. So the Botanical Field Apprenticeship was inspired by Columbine School. Mm-hmm. I'm still affiliated with Columbine's, you know, Howie's a good friend, and I actually have Stephen Yeager come down. He's actually one of our guest teachers. He introduces the world of botany to my students. And so basically it's a 6-month program where we spend a good 75% of our time actually in the field. And then, but because people are busy, we tried to make it able for a lot of people to fit it into their busy schedules. So we go out on the weekends. It's 2 weekends a month, and it runs from January technically through June, but the field is done in May, because the first year I did it, we ended on the solstice in June, and it was amazing. Like the week of solstice, everything just dries up around here. So I was like, okay, we'll end in May. So it worked out really well. And let's see, we are in, I think, our 8th year of doing the apprenticeship. We launched our 2nd year field this year, and that was amazing. I'm so excited. We already have people begging us to do a 3rd year.
Nice.
You know, that's a really good sign when your field apprentices are like,
I need more.
Just miss being in the field with you. We just need to get in the field more. And it's like, yes, I love that. It's so wonderful. So yeah, we submerge ourselves in the interconnectedness of nature and life. And we study ecosystems and the plants that are the associations of like the chaparral and the sage scrub. We go out to the Anza Borrego or Sonoran Desert, so north end of the Sonoran Desert. And then a really big part of the field apprenticeship, what I realized early on. So I have a quick story. I have a friend that that studied with the Kumeyaay Nation of Southern California for 12 plus years. And the Kumeyaay Nation is the primary nation of indigenous of this area. There are numerous other tribes, but the Kumeyaay Nation is San Diego County and going down into Baja. So Cindy Christ, Following Seasons Botanicals, she studied with numerous members, and she was given permission to share the information. So I asked her early on if she would teach about acorn processing. Not teaching people how to do it the indigenous way, but teaching people about the value and the culture and the reason why the acorn is so incredibly important as food, as medicine. And one of the things that I really admired about Cindy is that she said, let me ask you a question. Do you think it's appropriate to be teaching people to harvest when we live among so many reservations and we are in the middle of a drought? Because this was back in the middle of the 2000s, or maybe the early 2010s. And I said, first of all, thank you for asking me that question, because I know when you're friends with someone, it can be hard to ask those tough questions. Mm-hmm. because it put me on the spot as to like whether it's appropriate that what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so I thanked her for having the gumption to ask that question. But what I told her is I've been teaching plant walks in Southern California for, 6 to 8 years at that point. And what I noticed is that people are going to harvest whether they know how to do it properly or not, like period. And so I have not experienced a lot of times in life where the idea of just abstinence works 100%.
Right.
The idea of just saying don't harvest doesn't work, because there's going to be people that are still going to do it, people who are just enamored with it.
Right.
So to me, the right thing to do is to teach people how to do it ethically.
Yeah.
Not to just say, no, don't do that, but to actually teach people how to do it ethically. And so the more I thought about that, as I do take people out into the national forests around here, is to realize that San Diego County actually has more farms per capita than most other counties in the nation, because it's a large county and we have a 12-month growing season. Nice. And we are filled with 1 to 5 acre farms. There's some bigger ones, but we've got hundreds of 1 to 5 acre farms. And nice. So I have some friends that run a farm. I have some past students that run another farm. So I started realizing that all the farms around here have, number one, they have a ton of weeds. So that's a great thing. But number two, most of them have additional property where there's native plants on them and they don't do anything with it. So, and then the more I interacted with these farms, I realized that farmers gamble their lives and their livelihoods every time they plant seeds, because they don't get any money until they water it, weed it, harvest it, process it, and then sell it. So 3 to 6 months of work without actually getting money rolling in for that work. I don't know about that, but there's very few jobs out there that are that much of a gamble. And we, as people of these communities, need to remember food doesn't come from grocery stores. Food comes from farms and ranches. Food comes from people, and the better food comes from people who really care. Yeah. And so how about we actually remember this, because this used to be something that was very common. We all had gardens. We all had, farms that we communicated with during stressful times. And the same thing happened during lockdown in California last year. All of a sudden the farm stands started blowing up because people realized we need more access to food. So I love the fact that the way that I organized the apprenticeship actually fits perfectly with the supporting of local farms, and quite frankly, with COVID standards, where we're outside most of the time, and then bringing people to farms and to realize like this is where amazing food is, and then now being part of farm school. And so a big part of the apprenticeship is about creating community, because beyond the farms now I have a couple of friends that have private property. They're not herbalists, they're not botanists, they don't actually know the plants, they just know that it's native plants and they want to protect it. And so somebody like me coming in with students who are teaching about this land, and it's all about honoring and ethical consumption, because we recognize if you're harvesting, we are consuming, we are taking. So how can we do that? Number one, in an ethical way. And part of that is by creating relationships with our community. So we put less pressure on our native stands and create more of a, basically a centralized net of protection for when big things happen. I mean, most people had no contingency plan for a world pandemic. Yeah. So now we have we've got all kinds of ways that we can develop community. And that makes us actually have more security, because we have access to food and we have access to actually honoring, the community, and realizing that like we make a much stronger net for each other when we are interconnected as community. And so the field apprenticeship just facilitated that.
That's beautiful. I love that. And, it's a lot of talk about food, and I think that more and more awareness is happening with people wanting to be connected to their food and their farmers. And that's really beautiful. But I think another great point here is that you're connecting them with their medicine and their farmers,
Absolutely.
That is really, truly beautiful. That's one of the things that I love to see happening more. Like the food connection is a little bit more mainstream than well, a lot more mainstream than the
Yeah.
medicine thing. But I think
Yeah.
we're making more impact and making that happen a lot. So your apprenticeship sounds amazing.
It's so amazing. There's one other thing I wanted to say about it, and that is that you don't have to be a field botanist or a botanist at all to be an herbalist.
Right.
You don't have to know botany. What I have found for myself is that by learning to turn my botanical eyes on, and what I mean by that is being able to see the differentiations of plants and ecosystems, I feel like I become a better herbalist because I'm not just growing a plant. I mean, garden-based is wonderful. Certainly, don't get me wrong, but it's that idea of being able to go out and visit plants and actually see how they grow and how they change, and having that relationship with plants by actually putting yourself out there. That we generally have a perspective of nature in this culture, kind of like a voyeur, you know, and I learned this from Stephen Yeager, and that's his terminology, that like, you know, kind of growing up learning like nature's out there and that it's like outside of us, and we look at it and see that it's beautiful, and then we go home into our safe little walls, and that actually humans are part of nature. And when we put ourselves in nature and see that nature is around our houses as well, like we don't have to drive an hour to the most beautiful place. Like when we can get people to realize that actually connecting with nature is just connecting with the seasonal changes, you know, and really being present and learning to turn those botanical eyes on, you end up realizing that you know a lot more. Like I feel like I walk amongst friends when I'm in nature now because I go out all the time. And people think it's so silly that like I get excited and I wave at plants and they wave back. And, you know, and initially I understand like that's, it's very like, oh, like it's so woo-woo or it's so like esoteric. You're communicating with plants. Like, okay, so do you think it's weird when your dog gets excited to see you when you've been gone all day?
Right.
Then why on earth would it be like plants are living things too, and they interact. Living. So then like waving at a plant and having it wave back like is not actually so weird. It's actually a pretty standard part of life.
Right? It's great. I love it. I do the very similar thing as I'm out there like, hi, little friend. And, you know, some of my friends that are walking with me are like, you are such a nerd. And I'm like, I know. I love it. It's great. You know, and then there's everybody that's like, please teach me this. Please teach me this.
Right.
Please teach me
Anybody
this.
Who's not passionate enough about something to call themselves a nerd, I kind of feel a little sorry for them because I had to come to terms with being a nerd because it means that I'm passionate enough that I don't care what people think about me. Like I will wave at plants. I will like get down on my belly to like look at the teeny tiny flowers because it's so cool. And I hope that I get to share that type of passion with people to realize, you know, there's so much to be passionate about in life. And when you're tapped into nature, there's things to learn all the time. There's things to pay attention to. You know, we hear about these stories about like, oh, a hummingbird landed right next to me and how magical it can feel. And yet that stuff is happening every day,
all the time.
All the time.
Yeah. I think you're reminding me of how really fortunate and gifted I am, you know, not to bring it to me, but just hearing that nature connection and how important that is, and remembering that there are unfortunately people that don't have this deep immersed connection to nature, and there's an abundance of those people, which is unfortunate because it is us. We are nature, you know, and gosh, I think there have certainly been times in my life where I wasn't so connected or so aware. I moved all over the country, and I've always been a nature lover. Like I was always out making mud pies and camping and the tomboy, much like you were saying in the beginning. And, you know, now I'm so blessed to live on Mount Hood in the middle of a beautiful rainforest on a river where I get to see eagles and heron and beautiful plants every day. Like epic, right? But also important to help other people feel that kind of epic connection. I think one of the things that I run into as a challenge there. Like in the early 2000s, I went to school for outdoor leadership and environmental ed. And I was really, really passionate about making sure that everybody gets to experience nature, because there was nothing that was more humbling for me and more like, oh my gosh, this is it, you know, and inspiring and like truly awesome. You know what I mean? And I remember I was in this politics of recreation class, and this teacher, I was like, oh, I got to get all the kids out there. Everybody needs to be in nature, and this has to happen. And I had this teacher that was like, oh, that's great that you want to get everybody out in nature. That's really cool. But what are you going to do when all of your favorite trailheads are now crowded and there's litter and trash piled up, or your favorite place to go camping is now paved as an RV resort, or you just can't get that peace and that privacy that you get? And I was like, oh shit, you know, this is like 2001. And we're kind of in that era where I live today, and it's sad and it's heartbreaking, but it also brings me to this point of like the importance of spreading these kinds of messages. Like, yes, everybody does need to embrace nature, but we also need to respect nature and leave it as we found it, if not better. And yeah.
And if we don't teach people to not drop that garbage, then they're just going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
So the answer is not to don't tell people to go out in nature, but to teach people how to show respect in nature. Yeah,
exactly.
Yes, exactly. I do understand that. I remember a couple of times actually going out to areas the day before a plant walk, like open to the public, and actually cleaning up trash so that it would appear more magical.
Aww. Because
there isn't like trash everywhere. And but you know, that's part of living in Southern California. There's 22 million people. So coming to terms with realizing this is where we live, and we need more people that honor and respect it.
Yeah, for sure.
And also realizing that this is kind of a tough aspect that for a lot of people to deal with, but that there is a privilege when you can have that peace and quiet in nature, especially when you live around a lot of people.
Yeah.
And that I am very thankful for that, because here, it's very rare to actually get to a place where it's actually silent. Actually, I don't think I know of a place, because there's still always helicopters, or because we have military bases down here. And so, but even to get to a place where there aren't people, it's very difficult here. You have to be willing to hike far to get away from just people being everywhere, So realizing, that you can find those places, and that it's not just about trying to stop people from going there, but developing those relationships with those places. One of the things that the field apprenticeship has also taught me that I teach others, and part of this I learned at the Pacific Northwest as well, is that as nature lovers, we can sometimes have a tendency of demonizing people who have jobs like logging or hunters, where maybe it's not a job, but it's their choice. And that, a lot of places that I take people, we don't go to trailheads. We go to places that are not like nature tourism. Yeah. Well, that means that hunters are there. Right. And the thing is that the hunters aren't bothering us. We're actually bothering the hunters, because we're a bunch of people making noise, But what I realized up in Oregon with logging and with hunting down here is that these are people who have actually dedicated their lives to being in nature, and that oftentimes they know more about the ecosystem and the animal interactions than a lot of my nature loving friends. Yeah. And so to not demonize people who have a love of nature, but just show it differently. Right. To realize that there's a lot that we can learn from each other, and that we don't have to be enemies, that we can be allies in our love of nature.
Heck yeah. Yeah, I love that. I definitely see the demonizing kind of thing a lot, but I'm like, but wait, this has to happen. And you know what? You built your house and you used wood. Right. So, let's find a way, a happy little balance there that we can all work together and have some respect and love for the land.
Yeah. Yes.
Awesome. I want to come down and I want to do your field apprenticeship, but I don't know that it's going to happen anytime
Well, good. I want to
soon.
come up and visit you in Mount Hood because we go to
Yeah.
Oregon pretty much every summer. So,
Yeah.
because we've been going to the Oregon Country Fair for years, and I go out to visit my favorite places and some of my favorite plants
Yeah.
each year, and I have friends in Portland that I try to get up and see. So yeah, I would love to come visit. I don't get to Mount Hood barely ever.
Yeah. I was like, I'm not Portland.
Right. Oh, I know.
But I did live in Portland for 8 years. So, but that was 13 years ago. So, yeah, I'd love for you to visit. And Country Fair, my mom lives in Bonita.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And word on the street is that it may not happen.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I'm a vendor, and so I'm not involved in the staff. So I'm a vendor. Right. So I don't hear about it. I just wait until.
Well, I'll just not spread any rumors on this podcast. There was nothing said other than the Country Fair is great.
Yes, Country Fair is awesome, and we went up this year, and it didn't happen. But it's still seeing friends and family, and that's really the main reason we go to the fair anyway, is to see friends and family. So.
Of course.
Right.
Awesome, Shana. How else can people find you? Tell me how all these people listening to this show or watching it will be able to find you.
Okay, let's see. We have, of course, a basic website, sagecountryherbs.com. And then we also have Sage Country Field Apprenticeship as a website as well, kind of a co-website, more focused. Our online courses are all at Sage Country Herbs, as well as we have a blog of a lot of recipes and all kinds of other stuff constantly happening. We are on social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook under Sage Country Herbs. We have a YouTube station as well. What else do we do?
All kinds of magic. You're all over the place.
Yeah. I mean, we have, we just did a plant walk with Mountain Rose. And so they've been releasing some videos that we did with them back in July when we were visiting Oregon. And I also just want to give a little shout out to other things that I'm involved in, that Sage Country Herbs is involved in, and that is Solidarity Farm and Food Shed San Diego. That's the farm that does farm school, but they're also like leading in the farming community with carbon sequestration and educating other farmers about it, as well as, and what is their catchphrase? Fight climate change with your fork, by supporting more farms.
Nice.
But they're also, they were one of many farms that created something called Food Shed San Diego. And that is a group of like 30 to 35 farms that have been coming together to make sure that extra food gets delivered down into low income areas. I am so honored for Sage Country Herbs to be part of community that is working to protect our less fortunate and make sure that everybody understands that really good food is valuable. So solidarityfarm.com and Food Shed SD are also two, while it's not Sage Country Herbs, they are things that we're affiliated with, and we're really honored to be involved with them.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. I'm glad you restated the website of solidarityfarm.com and then Food Shed SD. I love that. It sounds like a brilliant kind of program in all the ways. And I love fight climate change with your fork. That is really, really fantastic. Are there other things you want to say before we take off, and other great messages that the masses need to know?
Let's see. Oh, so the field apprenticeship is technically full at this point, but we are still interviewing for the wait list because things happen and sometimes people have to drop out. And then the lecture is all online, and that is actually open and available as its own standalone class.
Ooh, nice.
So even if you live in like Vermont, but and we are like the furthest ecosystem from you, but you want to learn about some of the plants of the Southwest, the lecture is open and available for anybody to jump in. And so just, go to contact us on our website and just shoot me an email, or you can contact me on social media. And I do generally, I missed it yesterday, but generally I do a live at noon on Instagram.
Nice.
Going over a wide variety of things. So, and that there's actually a bunch of new stuff coming up on the website. We've got lots of classes that are going to become hybrid classes on the website. So it'll be both watching videos, but also tuning in with me for bonus material and Q&A. And so we're on the grow, and we're really excited to be working with a variety of communities. And so just getting more people involved in the community. And on that note, I want to say, number one, thank you so much for having me. I love your mission statement about getting an herbalist in every home. I think that is absolutely, again, that to realize that, like, I love to tell people, especially students, that like, okay, so herbal medicine is the medicine of the people. For as long as humans have been on the planet, we've been working with herbal medicine. I also like to start every class that I teach having anything to do with plants with every single person here has a relationship with plant medicine, or with plants, I should say. Whether you have ever drank a cup of chamomile tea, or you formulate your own tincture, or you just drink coffee. Coffee comes from a plant.
Yeah.
We all have relationships with plants. And so getting back into all of our relations, all of our communities, and realizing that that there is so much there. And by having a goal of having an herbalist in every household again, is taking advantage of that, of realizing that there is all of this abundance. And so I love how mission statements of like-minded folks just blend perfectly.
Thank you. Yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you for that. And thank you for coming on and taking the time to herb nerd out with me and share your message and doing the incredible work that you do. Like, I've listened to quite a few of your lectures, and you're brilliant, and it's so important. And I'm really grateful that you're doing what you're doing. And I'm grateful that we finally got to connect, and I can't wait to do it again a little more in person next time, instead of like, oh no, here's the tractor, I got to load my stuff up.
Right.
Yeah. So here's to many more herbalists coming out into the world and discovering their connection with plants and the beautiful medicine and food that they bring.
Yeah. Cheers to that.
Yeah. Cheers. Thanks so much, Shana.
My pleasure. Take care, Mel.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.